I'd like to tell you about the keyboard which first got me interested in music, in actually making music, in playing music. Now, if you are of a certain generation, you may well have had one of these as well. I will also show you where you can get a free VST sample-based plugin of this instrument, and there's also a Eurorack version. So the instrument I'm talking about looked a little bit like this. It was a Bontempi chord organ. Now, mine was not red, it was a sort of creamy colour. My parents bought it for me when I was about 12 or 13. Now, I'm not sure why they bought this for me. I don't recall being interested in making music up until that point, although I was very interested in music itself and was an avid listener to BBC Radio 1. Neither of my parents were in the least way musical. Between them, my parents had 9 brothers and sisters, and not one of them was musical either. Anyway, I really liked playing with the Bontempi. It was produced from the 70s, I think, through to the 80s, maybe even a little bit later. But this was a time really before synthesizers had appeared or taken off, certainly. Electronic circuits were definitely analog. And Bontempi produced low-cost instruments for children and the education market. The chord organ was quite interesting because it was a reed-based instrument, a little bit like the mouth organ and the accordion. But whereas you had to force air through your mouth with a harmonica and play bellows with an accordion, this used an electric fan to direct air over reeds which vibrated to produce the sound. It was quite an interesting sound back then, and I think it has a certain amount of nostalgic appeal even now. So the essential aspect of the chord organ was that you would play a melody on the short keyboard. I think mine was about 2 octaves long. You would play the melody on the keyboard, and there were a set of chord buttons on the left-hand side. So you would press the buttons to create a chordal accompaniment. Now, different models of the organ had different numbers of chord buttons. I think probably 8, 12, 18, something like that. I think mine had about 12, but I can't actually remember. But the interesting thing for me was the music booklet which came with it. It contained traditional music notation, but as well as the notes, each note was assigned a number which corresponded to one of the keys on the keyboard. So the idea was you would look at the music, you would find the number of the note and press that key on the keyboard. So that's how I started playing. However, it didn't take me long to realise, for me at least, that this was a very clunky way of doing things. Now, when I was in junior school, most of us learnt to play the recorder. Now, this was a sort of thing in English schools. I don't know if it was a similar thing on the continent or in America, but I did have a very small smattering of knowledge about music notation. And these tunes for the Bontempi were quite simple, and it really didn't take me too long to realise it was easier to read the notes in the book and play the corresponding key than it was to look at the number and find the number of the key. It just made more sense. So the Bontempi was certainly responsible for developing my knowledge of music notation. Now, after I had worked through the tunes in the book, I decided to expand my musical knowledge, and I bought some busker books. You've probably seen these. I think they are probably still available. They were small A5 booklets containing around 100 songs, and they contained a lead line of the tune and chords. So the idea was you would play the tune and make your own accompaniment up from the chords. So I started playing tunes from busker books, but it soon became evident that they required chords which were not on the Bontempi chord organ. So I bought a book of chords which had diagrams of every chord in every key. Now, I learned these mainly parrot fashion. I was still a little bit sketchy about scales and keys. I think the most adventurous the Bontempi books got were probably the keys of G and F with 1 sharp and 1 flat. Now, as the Bontempi lacked so many chords, I formed the chords with my left hand and the lower part of the organ and played the tunes on the right. So I would switch between forming chords the Bontempi did not have with chords that the Bontempi did have. It was a real hodgepodge and probably sounded absolutely terrible. And after I'd been doing this for a short while, I realised the limitations of the chord organ. So when I was 16, I bought myself a piano, with my parents' permission, of course. Now this piano was naturally second hand, and I do remember it cost me a fiver, 5 Great British pounds. Now at the time I was relying on pocket money. Later on, when I was 16, I did get a Saturday job, and for working one whole Saturday I was paid £1 whole pound. So that will give you some idea of the cost of the piano. So the piano cost a fiver, but I had to pay a man with a van £7 to transport it from the seller's house to our house. So in total, that was 3 months worth of Saturday jobs. When I got the piano, oh joy, I could play absolutely any chord. At least in theory. At the time I was still learning chords pretty much parrot fashion. But from that point my musical knowledge grew and developed. But that is a story for another time. But it all started with this Bontempi organ, which gave me a grounding in keyboard use, in music notation and in chord formation. So did you have a Bontempi organ? How did you get on with it? Did you enjoy it? Was it in any way responsible for your music career? There seems to have been a bit of a resurgence of interest in the chord organ. David Helowitz, who created the free Decent Sampler sample playback plugin, has created a free sample instrument of the chord organ. This is the website, which has some interesting information about it, and also a video, and he has a YouTube channel well worth checking out. He has some really interesting videos on there. And his site has links to other free Decent Sampler instruments. If you're into Eurorack, Music Thing has a module which can be used as a chord organ. Music Thing may be better known for its radio music module. It's the same module as the chord organ, only with different firmware. And if you have one, radio music or the chord organ, you can change them over by changing the firmware. I actually have 2 radio music modules. I never got around to converting one into the chord organ, which initially was my intention. But the radio music module itself is really interesting, and I used it on a piece of music. Card up there, link in description. And of course links to all the websites I mentioned will be in the description. Now if you are stirred by this in any way and would like to get your hands on an original Bontempi chord organ, then eBay is absolutely full of them. The prices vary considerably, but I think you could pick one up for a reasonable amount. Now Bontempi is an Italian musical instrument manufacturer, so I would imagine that these instruments are available on the continent. I have no idea if they made it over to America, Australia or anywhere else. If you have any memories of the Bontempi chord organ, please let me know in the comments. And if you have enjoyed watching this video, I think you might enjoy these videos as well. As always, I really do appreciate you spending time with me watching my videos. So for that, thank you very much indeed. I will see you again in the next one.